Okay, so a fair bit's happened in the last 24 hours in the sports news. Really, some not positive news, let's just say that. The Women's Super League and Challenge Cup, so the RFL have come out and said they're cancelling what could be salvaged of the 2020 season. My phone keeps going off, that's really interesting. But yeah, the Women's Super League will not be resuming this year. And that is a worrying sign for other minority or say niche or smaller professional and semi-professional sports. I got asked the question yesterday that would semi-professional sports be in a better position going forward than professional sports in resuming play or getting back to some kind of normality? This decision by the RFL would say no. They are allowed to remain in training, can't play games. So, if in response to the question yesterday, would some semi-pro sports fare better? The answer is no. The fact that the RFL received a government loan at the beginning of the crisis says to me not all is well with rugby league in the UK, not by a long shot. And we've already seen the Toronto Wolfpack pull out of the rest of this Super League season and the Challenge Cup, which raises concerns and questions about their long-term future and whether next season we would have a Toronto Wolfpack, because we've seen in other sports recruitment is a problem. And the issues with the Wolfpack are long-standing. This has amplified those issues. We've also seen in the news Paul Pogba has tested positive for the coronavirus. That is troubling considering that the regular season only starts in a couple of weeks' time. It's only, I think, September the 12th, the Premier League season resumes. We have the Charity Shield this weekend, so that's quite worrying if you're a Man United fan or involved with that club. That a key player this close to the start of the season has tested positive, but there's been a rise in infections in France, so question marks have to be asked about players in the off season self-isolating, etc., and all the stuff that regular people have to go through. So the protocols with football, we have seen a smattering of positive tests throughout football since March. So that raises questions about how football is dealing with the ongoing pandemic and the ongoing crisis. Other sports seem to have dealt with things far better when it comes to players self-isolating or operating in the bubble. But that's the second Man United player to be in the news for the wrong reasons. Obviously, Harry Maguire's obviously had his legal troubles in Greece. So Manchester United, we have to look at how they're communicating with their players in regards to safety, self-isolating, and behaviour off the field as well. Celtic already being out of the Champions League is no surprise. It sums up the state of where Scottish football are in relation to how, as I've done many videos in the history of the channel, how far I feel football has slipped, down the pecking order with Scottish football, how it's actually declined as a force in the last 20 or so years. Celtic being out of the Champions League before the group stage doesn't surprise me in the slightest. Neil Lennon's come out and said if players aren't pulling their weight, they can leave. But obviously, with the current situation financially, again, what clubs are going to be willing to spend a lot of money in the transfer window, considering that it will be a very condensed transfer window and condensed pre-season. And now that we're seeing players like Pogba test positive, that raises concerns about the integrity of the game. And there needs to be greater leadership from not just the SFA or the FA, but UEFA and FIFA on the issue of players isolating correctly or keep themselves as safe as possible, coronavirus guidance. Football has dealt with this crisis possibly the worst out of all the professional sports I can think of. They've not dealt with it very, very well. And their insistence on trying to complete the season, the whole thing's a bit of a mess. On the thing with Messi, there's been no further announcements made. There's a lot of rumours linking in with a variety of clubs around Europe. And of course, he has stated before he wouldn't mind going back to Rosario in Argentina. So The Messi situation, there's been no further clarification on can he leave on a free? Will there be a transfer fee? Will there be a Bosman ruling? We don't know what's going to actually happen with Messi right now, where he's going to end up. But from what sources are stating in the media, it's looking very likely he will be leaving. It's just a question of how he leaves. Is at the end of the day, it's a question of how. You know, whether there's a transfer fee paid or he can leave on a free. But the possibility of a Bosman ruling is there, and while it's rarely used, that has to be considered in any kind of agreement. On the EIHL, we've mentioned it's been coming up a couple of times as a question that the league doesn't know if it's going to restart for this season. The future of some teams is in serious doubt. The future of arenas is in serious doubt. This off-season has been, I think, the most crisis-hit off-season for British ice hockey. We just don't know what the future holds. But I think European ice hockey across the whole sport is in a bit of a paralysis. So we just don't know what's going to happen going forward with ice hockey as a sport in Europe at the moment, whether there's going to be a season, plain and simple, and how many teams will have arena issues or how many teams fold. We just don't know. That is a very open-ended question. That's another sport that I think has dealt very badly with the lockdown. I think the NHL in the US and Canada has dealt with it reasonably well. But again, concerns about the collegiate side of sport. We know there's going to be no college football season in the US and Canada. Again, there's a collegiate NCAA system to do with player development, the minor leagues, the junior leagues. Yes, the NHL playoffs are continuing in a bubble format. We just don't know what next season holds. Obviously, they've delayed the draft, they've delayed free agency, delayed the trade window pre-season. Provisional plans say the NHL is going to restart in November. We don't know when fans are going to be allowed back into the arenas. I haven't even got to the NBA and their boycott of matches following the BLM protests that have now really escalated across the US. And while I understand, and this is where I think I want to clarify a few positions on things, and I'll get to the worst board in football and the best board in football. We've seen a lot in the last couple of seasons of racist incidents at football and other sporting events and players going online complaining. What I suggested would be the best course of action was go on strike then. And this is what's happened in the US. Rather than just complaining online and doing protests before games, actually go on strike, hurt the sports in the pockets until they can actually take action that is positive. Because when I go to work, I don't go to work to be abused. I don't go to work. No one signs a contract saying, "Yeah, you have to tolerate this." We do. I mean, I work in refuse and stuff like that, and yeah, we cop a lot of abuse. And unfortunately, in the industry I work in, the worker is generally not supported as much as they should. And we've had union involvement in a whole host of issues across the industry. No one goes to work to get abuse. Retail workers have had a lot of it, and hospitality workers have had a lot of it over recent years. Workers aren't protected. Now, yeah, these are multi-millionaire sports stars, but the NBA has started a trend and it's rippling across North American sport. They're actually going on strike. And we may start to see some momentum in the issue of tackling the problem. It's not going to go away fully. There's always going to be some idiot, but we are starting to see some action. Now, in the past, we've seen player strikes and lockouts over money. This is not over money. They're not saying we want to get paid more. They're not saying we want a greater revenue sharing. They're just saying this is a social issue that is affecting our playing group. And it's unacceptable and it's been allowed to be accepted for so long. Plain and simple. I'd rather see action like that is peaceful rather than sports stars complaining on Twitter but not going to their player unions, not actually going, well, let's go strike for a couple of weeks. Then they might, as the sporting governing bodies, take action on an issue that clearly is not being dealt with very, very well. I think Right, let's have a look. There's a lot of questions coming. Barcelona having the worst board in football. I think there's a lot of teams that have pretty bad boardrooms and board decisions. I think football itself, there's too much money in the sport. I can't say there's the best. I think some of the smaller clubs, ironically, deal with their finances and their player contracts a lot better than some of the big clubs in Europe. You could look at Exeter City as an example. There's a lot of fan involvement in that club's day-to-day running. Yes, they're in a lower league, and they're not a superstar-studded club. But if you want to see a club that's well run, lives within its means, and has lots of fan involvement, Exeter City is the example I cite in English football. But when it comes to clubs having really good board decisions, the German Bundesliga, I think a lot of the clubs there are well run. Um, there's a lot of fan involvement in German football. But in the main, there's too much money in the sport, and we're seeing now the repercussions of having an unbalanced, badly financially regulated, uh, bad financial policy, and weak governance is coming home. Uh, um, Weak governance is coming home to hurt the sport, be it at club level governance, national governance, or international governments. The way they dealt with the coronavirus pandemic as a whole was, let's be honest, pretty shambolic. Different leagues just decided to do what they wanted. There was no overall universal plan. They flip flopped from the Europa League and Champions League, saying suspended indefinitely. We're going to focus on domestic leagues, and the various domestic FAs started making up their own decisions when it comes to the various levels of league structure. Oh, we'll suspend these leagues, but these leagues can carry on. These leagues we're not sure about. There's a breakdown in trust between players, clubs, the governing bodies, the fans. Uh, it's a mess. Do you think there'll be an ice hockey world championships? Well, they're meant to be next year. They've obviously pushed them back a year. They're still meant to take place in Switzerland in May. Great Britain are still on the slate to play. About all the teams that have made the top level are due to play. But we don't know if any of the domestic leagues in Europe are going to, be able to start anytime soon. There's a lot of concern about the elite league here. Other sports leagues across Europe. I mean, in France, there's no sport allowed until at least September. That was the announcement made back in April by the French government. They haven't changed tack on that. So we don't know, obviously, what's going to happen. Fans being allowed into arenas, which is vital for the sport's health and well-being. It's not looking good. The fact that a minor nation in one of the lower categories of world championships that have pulled out is concerning for the IIHF, because these are like promotion relegation from the top tier, second tier, third tier, all that. If a nation has pulled out, that raises concerns about the integrity of the tournament. Will other teams decide to allow players to go, or they also pull out? How they organise it? Would there be bubble cities? Because of travel restrictions. At the moment, the IIHF have basically said the World Championships going ahead. They pushed them back 12 months. Same with the Olympics. Same with the Euros. So next summer is going to be really busy for sport. It's just a matter of, can we get through these next couple of months? The the Ice Hockey Champions League and Continental Cup, again, we don't know. Because domestic leagues can't restart. We should be starting pre-season now. We should be starting pre-season now for British ice hockey. We don't know if we're going to actually have a season. We don't know how many of these arenas are going to be open. It's plain and simple. The sport is in its worst ever crisis, and this sport lurches from crisis to crisis every off season. There's a team going out of business, or a team rebranding, or concerns about an arena, concerns about finances. This coronavirus pandemic has damn near killed the sport in the UK, and it's causing untold damage across Europe. But a lot of sport has been hammered. over the last 4 or 5 months. A lot of sport has felt financial difficulty because of this. And I started the live stream with the Women's Super League and Challenge Cup being cancelled for the rest of this year. And this is the RFL, an organisation which received the government money to keep it going. The only league that's restarted is the Super League for the men and the Challenge Cup for the men, and a rescheduled and a restructured Challenge Cup at that, with teams still pulling out. So sport is in a tricky position. There's a lot of reorganisation that needs to take place, and I think a lot of reform that needs to take place. There are ongoing concerns with a variety of sports, and I think the IIHF are in a difficult position as a winter sport. I mean, we are meant to be in pre-season now. We're meant to be having pre-season games now. And that isn't happening. Oh, my guttering outside has failed again. Oh, God. Great. Yeah, the rain's quite bad here. And the guttering outside my flat has just completely failed. So that's brilliant. Who do I think wins the Stanley Cup final? Honestly, on this one, I don't know. I could not tell you who wins the Stanley Cup this year. We couldn't have predicted the last couple of seasons, if I'm brutally honest, because we've had the play-in round and because obviously the end of the regular season was suspended. That really nullified a lot of momentum for teams, and I haven't really been following these playoffs. It is weird watching the NHL playoffs in August, if I'm honest. But there's some teams that are doing quite well out of it, and other teams that haven't really adjusted so well. I mean, Todd Reirden's been sacked by the Washington Capitals. That was a surprise. Was not expecting that. He was only in the job for 2 years. Big flash of lightning. That was a big surprise. Todd Reirden getting sacked by the Caps. Was not expecting that decision to be made by the Capitals organisation, considering they've been so consistent for so many years in making the Stanley Cup playoffs. And, obviously they weren't taking that next step that was expected of the team. That is a rumble of thunder out there. That storm's getting close. Vegas Golden Knights, yeah, they have a great opportunity to do what they failed to do in 2018. But again, it's so open, and it's so up in the air. I think any team that is still in the playoffs could do it. There is no way to predict. It's even harder to predict than the Blues winning last year, I think, because the end of the regular season was curtailed and because we had the play-in round. That really mixes things up completely. Teams have obviously played basically an extra round to this point because you had the seeding round as well as the round robin. So it is a difficult one. The fact that the season's still ongoing, the postseason's still ongoing, means, if any players test positive now and any teams that are competing now, then we have a big problem for the NHL. But so far, the NHL has dealt with the situation very, very well, shown a way forward in North American sport. But whether next season actually takes place or not, considering they've penciled in a restart in around November, we'll wait and see. We will wait and see. I don't think anyone can predict what's going to happen next. I think it's a very open Stanley Cup this year. But all told, it's a very open Stanley Cup. I couldn't predict anything, but we'll see what happens. It's been a very strange, last few months. Very strange last few months. Trying to think of what else is really important. I think the World Championship Ice Hockey is the first international sporting tournament next year that we will have to keep our eye on if it is postponed again. Then we have to look at the Euros. I think the Euros, they're going to have a think whether it can be transcontinental, if it can be done across the whole continent of Europe. The Olympics, there are question marks whether that will take place next year as well. So while we have a lot to possibly look forward to next year, there's also a lot of question marks about sport next year and whether anything will take place. I mean, the Tour de France is going to start in a couple of days' time. So is the Giro, so is the Vuelta. There are some concerns about the Tour de France being completed because of the rise of infections in France. And normally the Tour is done by this time of year. So the cycling fraternity is tackling 3 Grand Tours at the same time when the Vuelta is normally taking place at this time of year by itself. Do I still upload my channel? Yeah, occasionally. I haven't for a while. I did a few videos across the summer of some of my lockdown adventures with my mates, where we went on walks and barbecues and stuff, but haven't done for a little while. I don't really upload much to that channel at the moment. Maybe I should do a little bit more. But to be fair, I've got a fair few films to watch when I get my TV set up, plugged in. I'm waiting for some furniture to arrive at my new flat. Once I get all that set up, I might do some film reviews and some video game reviews. There's a few. I'm looking forward to the new Xbox, the new PS5. Whether I actually get a new Xbox or new PS5 straight away is up for debate. It all depends on cost because that's a big outlay of cash. But no, I still have the other channel. I just don't upload as much content to that channel as initially planned a couple of years ago. I mean, when I first started the channel, it was all kind of fun, doing it. But having 2 channels and juggling them can be a bit difficult. But it's still there. There'll be some uploads coming soon. I've got to make some plans for this weekend because it's bank holiday weekend, and we'll see what happens. I might head up the River Thames, go for a little walk up the Thames. We might get some footage. It all depends on the weather. And depends on the availability of friends because I've got a busy weekend. I've got furniture arriving on Sunday. I've got to go to the mechanic on Saturday for my motorbike, have a gearbox repair, and Monday I question mark. It all depends on the weather. I mean, if there's any more of these fun storms flying around, might make it interesting, say the least. On the side of talking about going back to the best sports governance or best board or worst board in professional sport. Yeah, Barcelona have some internal divisions within their organisation. This is leading to Messi's exit, possibly PK's, possibly Suarez, possibly other players as well, leaving Barcelona. Organisations that have actually come out of this crisis are looking pretty good. The NRL, Peter V'landys as the Australian Rugby League chairman, has taken over. Todd Greenberg, the old NRL CEO, has been sacked. They brought in rule changes. They got the sport back month and a half earlier than anyone predicted. Got it back on May the 28th, when some people were saying, mid-July. So the NRL have done quite well coming out of this crisis. The AFL didn't do as well, but at the same time, again, they came out of the crisis reasonably well. They've also restarted play in Australia. Some sports haven't done so well. I mean, the various football associations and UEFA haven't come out of this well. I think they've come out of this quite badly. The RFL, I would say, have been quite mixed in their response. I mean, they had to seek government assistance. The fact they've announced today that the Women's Super League and Challenge Cup will be scrapped for the rest of this year is concerning for other minority or smaller team sports about any kind of resumption, as I say, because questions are being asked about the Elite League season. We're not sure if that's going to take place. We've seen in the build-up to the US Open, tennis players pulling out. We've seen, obviously, with the FA getting football resumed, that they cherry-picked the Premier League and the Championship, League One, League Two, and the non-league didn't feel very supported. They've raised a lot of concerns about things going forward. Individual clubs in these leagues, some have been highlighted as very badly run. You have to ask questions of the EFL. the Premier League and the FA in regards to team ownership and governance. The issues with Wigan and Macclesfield are still rumbling on. The Newcastle United takeover collapse, that I think was the big story of lockdown, was the way the FA and the Premier League really dragged out that takeover, the takeover bid and the process behind it. That I don't think helped the situation. Questions have to be asked about the transparency of a football takeover, and questions need to be asked about why it was dragged out when, if they knew they weren't going to go ahead with and allow the takeover, why it took the best part of 3 months for it to stutter and splutter. But the whole situation with Newcastle United has been ongoing for 4 years now. The club's been up for sale, so those are ongoing discussions with the future of the boardroom there. Sports personality of the year is going to be really boring. Well, motorsports sort of resumed. There are a few sports that have resumed, with either reduced fixture lists or condensed seasons. I think you have to look at it in a nutshell. We should be watching the Paralympics right now. Should be on. The Olympics have not long finished. We should be looking at watching the Vuelta cycling rather than all 3 Grand Tours taking place at the same time. We should be enjoying the early weeks of Football League season. So yes, it is going to be a weird sports personality of the year. There is no doubt on that. But what this crisis has told us over the last 4.5, 5 months is there needs to be massive reforms, not just in this country about how sport is run, financially governed, but across the world, how sport is governed, run, financed, how much the top end athletes are paid. The transparency of the organisations concerned. And while sports personality might be a bit boring, there are other things to discuss that I think are far more pressing than some overrated, same old people every year getting the award or being nominated kind of tripe that we get on the BBC, because I haven't watched sports personality for years. I think we need to look at the deep issues within sport. And a lot of it's to do with governance. A lot of it's to do with financial structuring and where the money goes, TV deals, and how much, especially team sports, how much football players, rugby players, league players, how much the athletes get paid, the integrity of the sports. I mean, the governance has been proven to be not good enough. Throughout this crisis, it's highlighted a lot of issues that have been swept under the carpet or not been as exposed as much, and that in itself, further concerns go forth. The issues with football, I talked about this yesterday with the PFA's response to the lockdown and clubs wanting to have discussions about pay cuts or wage deferrals, and the PFA come out straight away and say don't take any offers on the table. That was not constructive in the slightest. I think the PFA, the clubs, the FA, the Premier League and the EFL and the non-league should have got round the table. And the representatives of these organisations should have got round the table very early on and had more constructive discussions. I think the PFA coming out and releasing that statement, telling players not to take salary deferrals or wage cuts, was, at the time and even now, a PR disaster. The fact that individual playing squads and clubs came to agreements, like Birmingham City, for example, to forge a path ahead to protect non-playing staff jobs, was ultimately the way to go. But there was no directional guidance going forward in regards to how to deal with the pandemic. It was a real mess. And so when you're asking about how clubs, which club has got the best board in football, it's a tough one. because from what we've seen over the last 5 months, there is too much money in the game, and this pandemic has highlighted it's going to the wrong places, and it's not evenly distributed like it should be. And the TV deal has got to be questioned, and governance is at the top of the list as well. I think there's been a lack of leadership from UEFA downwards over a whole variety of things, um, and it's coming home to roost. It really is. You know, when the Black Lives Matter protests were taking place, all the sports quickly got on the PR bandwagon. They were gaslighting the situation, when in reality there was so many other issues taking place that if the players were, the players have been saying for a while that there's been a rise in racist, homophobic, just general abuse, be it online or in the stands from supposed fans. What's the PFA there for? It's a players' union. It's their trade union. They had the ability to go on strike. We already have anti-racism and anti-homophobia and anti-bullying campaigns endorsed by the FA, like the Kick It Out campaign, the Rainbow Laces campaign. They have clearly not worked in the slightest, yet they exist. We do not need to put slogans on shirts. We already have the Kick It Out campaign. It's there. It's well advertised. It's well known. It's been going on for over 20 odd years. The FA endorses that. UEFA has its own Kick It Out campaign. Kick It Out campaigns and endorsed by all the FAs that sign up to UEFA's charter. We already have these things. The players care that much. Rather than taking a knee or wearing a logo, go on strike. Action will happen much quicker when the sport is losing money. And what's been proven is without games taking place and fans being in the stands, guess what? The sport lost money. The sport was very keen to resume as quickly as possible. The FA, the Premier League, the EFL were very, very quick. And UEFA and all the other FAs wanted to get started as soon as possible. Money. When players who walk off the pitch because they've had enough are getting banned, that's not helping the situation. Players should actually use the PFA as an organisation. Go on strike. We're seeing this the NBA now. We're seeing it at the NBA now, saying enough's enough with these social problems that are also coming out in the sport, be it from fans in the stands hurling abuse to individual commentators or players or coaches within the game that they play. They've gone on strike because it hurts the NBA. It hurts them in their back pocket. And now it's spread to other sports. And this is the difference. Rather than having some gaslighting motion, because let's be honest, professional sports stars, a lot of them have been scouted when they're young. They haven't had to face the same trials and tribulations that the average bloke or average woman in the street has had to face in their lives. A lot of them, some have done it the hard way through amateur sport and semi-pro sport to get to the top level, but for the most part, they've not faced any challenges. A lot of them are sons and daughters of previous athletes. Some of them come from very wealthy backgrounds. They've not had to face some of the same social challenges that the average Joe has. They live in their own little bubble. There are options available to them. And the fact that organisations already exist, such as the Kick It Out campaign, what this is highlighted is that campaign clearly hasn't worked over the last 25 years. The Rainbow Laces, if the Rainbow Laces campaign and the other LGBTQ plus campaigns really have actually effectively worked, we wouldn't still have homophobic. We'll have more openly gay and lesbian and bisexual athletes. We don't. What do I make of Greg Inglis going to the Warrington Wolves? Well, I watched yesterday. I watched the interview he gave and the little documentary he gave on YouTube through was it ABC News, Australian Stories, about his mental health problems. Obviously, he's signing for next season. I think, he's had some bad injuries, but having this time out of the game, I think he's kept fit. It will only be like a one-season deal. I can't see him going like for a couple of seasons. but he feels that he's left a bit out there, and he wants to finish on a high rather than getting injured and getting done for a drink drive conviction. I think he wants to finish his playing career actually playing possibly a Challenge Cup final or a Grand Final. Warrington are a very good side in the Super League, but it is an indictment of the Super League, though, that a player can be medically retired in the NRL, come over here, and suddenly they're not medically retired. I think that in itself says, okay, well, Ray Inglis has got himself here. He was medically retired because of his shoulder and knee injuries, and they are bad injuries that he's sustained. These are not like little knocks. They are quite serious injuries that have had a massive impact, not only on his physical but his mental health. But on the side of, like James Graham, he's finished at the top level. Yeah, he signs for St Helens back in the Super League. He leaves the NRL, and I'm thinking to myself, that shows how far the NRL is ahead of the Super League. If you're considered that you're no good for the NRL level anymore, you're not good enough, you're not quick enough, you're not fit enough. Oh, but you can sign for a Super League club and be a marquee signing. That tells you the quality difference in NRL to Super League. You look at those players that finish in the NRL, come over here, doesn't matter what age they are. A lot of them have had some real bad injury problems. Blake Austin, his knees and all that are a shocking state. Yeah, he's a key part of the Warrington Wolves setup, but he can't make it in the NRL anymore. Greg Inglis, I think the younger Warrington players will learn a lot from him as a professional, as playing and fitness, going and training. But you look at Greg Inglis in his last few games for South Sydney, he's not there. And there was, the fact that he has got medically retired and he's coming out of retirement. Yeah, but the Super League, the Super League needs some positivity with the women's game not taking place the rest of this year. He needs a little bit of positivity and positive PR. I think Greg Inglis, I think his time out of the game has done him well. I think he's got his issues resolved away from the field. But there's still that fitness risk where he could sign for a year and he could only play a handful of games and go down injured again. That's the problem. But it does sum up how the Super League has lost ground on the NRL and why best Super League players have gone to the NRL and stayed in the NRL long term. It's not like flash in the pan, there for a season or two, come back. A lot of them decide to stick it out. Apart from Bateman at Canberra, where there's been a lot of goings on with his agent Isaac Moses and question marks over the contract negotiations, every English player that's gone there has stayed there long term, apart from Sam Tompkins. They've gone over there and they're sticking it out, and they're proving that the NRL is better. They want to challenge themselves against the best, and it shows the class difference. The fact the NRL got started sooner, restarted, the quality of play, the rule changes, the NRL seems to be ahead of the curve in the last decade or so. You look at the World Club Challenge, and that speaks for itself. How you look at the World Cup Challenge records for the English clubs versus the Aussie clubs. The favour is with the Aussies at the moment on the ledger. That tells you all you need to know about the quality gap that is continuing to grow. And the fact that when the World Cup Challenge takes place, the Super League clubs have already played 2 or 3 or 4 rounds, depending on how the fixtures are worked out when the season starts. And technically, it's still pre-season. The Roosters, that was their pre-season, was the World Cup Challenge, and they won that with a weakened squad. Just putting that in there. So I've really enjoyed watching the NRL since the restart. I'm enjoying the rule changes. The one ref system, is it the right way to go? Was the 2 ref system, could that have been tinkered with a little bit with a few of the rule changes? They still led the way. They still brought in a second ref. I am liking how it's evolved, but I got so used to the 2 ref system in the NRL. It's weird seeing a 1 ref out there. Whether that's the 1 ref staying as a permanent thing, we'll wait and see. But I think the 6 again rule is going to be a permanent thing. I think the speed of the game is much improved. There's some big stories, obviously, floating around the NRL. I mean, we've seen a couple of players, test positive for banned substances in the last few months, to do with steroids. Brandon Sheary, Cronulla being the big one. Literally, he was given his ban 2-3 days before the season restarted. I think that timing by Asada was a bit shit, to be honest. But on looking at it, the Brisbane Broncos situation is, who would have expected that? And when I was asked about what sporting team boards are the best and worst, the Broncos right now are making a right mess of things. Canterbury Bulldogs have made a right mess of things. So there's several team boards which haven't been running things very well for a very long time and have been getting away with it for a very long time until the coronavirus has really exposed them for how bad they are. The Brisbane Broncos situation, I mean, it's making great TV because it's so ham-fisted and badly organised and embarrassing that, they haven't come up with a succession plan. The initial plan was for Anthony Seibold to start this season. He's at Souths 2018. He agrees to go over in 2020. You would expect that second. I mean, it's weird, 2 years out from a date going, well, you're going to come here and coach from this date. It would have made sense to keep him at South Sydney for another year. But then things happened with Wayne Bennett and it became a circus. And it has been a circus for basically 2 years there. And while both sides made the finals last year, South Sydney have stayed, pretty solid. And Brisbane have just nosedived, and I think they could get worse. What else have we seen? Yes, the NRL has decided to really crack down on the crusher tackle. They've raised the penalty level, so now you get an automatic 1-game suspension if found guilty, which I think is a positive move. Ethan Lowe's injury on his neck means he may never play again, and that was more of one of the innocuous ones. So that is a positive to come out of the coronavirus lockdown, is the NRL's crackdown on that type of dangerous tackle. That's a positive to see. I think that was a long overdue crackdown that should have been brought in quite some time ago. Players are getting seriously injured, and it needs to get kicked out of the game. But we'll see what happens with any other rule tinkerings and changes. I think at the moment, Peter V'landys has got the 6 again rule and then the one ref system working well. The speed of the game has improved. They got back into action before any other sport. I think they were one of the first sports to actually come back into action. Actually, was the NRL. I think they're leading the way in a resumption to sport. They've worked out the bubble situation very, very well. They cut deals with state governments, and other sports should be looking at this to see how you do it. What we're seeing over in Europe is a complete and utter mess. There seems to be no communication between sports either about how to move forward, because some sports share facilities, and there seems to be no communication between the various stakeholders in European sport about how to safely restart. I mean, it's been very haphazard. We're not sure about what next season's going to look like in a variety of sports. Rugby union's in a mess. The Southern Kings and the Cheetahs won't be coming back to Pro 14 for the rest of their season until next year. That's obliged to that competition. So that's a bit of a mess. We're seeing issues with the French sport not being allowed to resume in any capacity until at least sometime in September. And now the infection rate is rising in France again, so we just don't know what's going to happen there. And now we have football players testing positive 2 weeks before the restart or the new season. The Messi situation, we know what's going to. And now this 8 nations that they brought in, the Japanese have now pulled out. I mean, this is chaos. they come up, the Rugby Union, World Rugby come up with this revised autumn calendar. Um, and the South Africans, no South African team has gone back to play. Australia and New Zealand are playing their own version of Super Rugby, locally. So they're not having a Super Rugby championship. I think the only way you can replace Japan is with someone like Georgia or Romania. Um, but even then you have to look at, okay, fine, you can add them to an Eight Nations autumn competition. But then you have to look at infection rates and travel and quarantine. And obviously, World Rugby had come up with this idea to put Japan in there. That's now not going to work. They've now pulled out. You know, I mean, France, no sport can take place until the earliest in September, but that's not a given. That could be pushed further back. So now you have another problem. And Rugby Union hasn't dealt with this lockdown very well. Just look at the financial mess that the last 5 months has been for Rugby Union. It's not been pretty viewing. Several unions have laid off staff completely and furloughed staff. Players have taken massive salary cuts, but we already knew that Rugby Union salaries were under the spotlight when the Saracens salary cap scandal broke, and when Augustine Pichot said there needs to be a restructuring financially of the game during his World Rugby election campaign. So Rugby Union's finances have been under the spotlight before this pandemic even hit. The fact that Japan, one of the more improved sides in the top two tiers, has now pulled out of the rescheduled tournament, which was designed to get rugby restarted and get the revenues flowing again, is concerning. Has World Rugby really thought this through? Have the stakeholders really thought this through? And I think the Japanese will be looking at the state of the virus in Europe and the rise in infections. They'll also be looking at quarantine. Their players are going to have to be away from home for a long time. They're going to have to quarantine. The fact that the two South African sides have pulled out of the Pro 14, it's a mess. Yeah. I'm assuming that's basketball. You're talking about there with the FIBA. I mean, again, the fact that you're going to have to do tournaments in bubbles. European sport has not dealt well with the last 5 months. That's a given. It hasn't. It hasn't. There's been no communication between the various governing bodies and things like that. There's been no communication between the various governing bodies and the stakeholders. It seems to be an ad hoc. Oh, let's just. It seems like they're making it up as they go along. There's no communication between the various governing bodies. What you have to look at is, as I say, I'm going to go back to this: the Australian and the Kiwi models, where they've got fans back into stadiums, they've got sport being played. Their virus infection rates, even though their populations are small, and I'll give you that, are far lower than in the rest of the world. And they didn't handle things very well themselves. But you look at that and you're thinking, you're scratching your head going, how have we cocked this up so badly? And you look at it and it does seem that there's been a lack of communication between the various governments and authorities and the various sporting governing bodies. It's been everyone for themselves, really. And it's when the TV deals started getting wobbly and the TV companies flexing their muscles, saying we want our money back, which caused further problems and didn't create a lot of friends for them either. And the same situation has been faced in Australia and New Zealand when it comes to Super Rugby, cricket, rugby league, V8 Supercars. That's a big draw as well. That's resumed now. So when you have all these various sports, and the TV companies there were saying, well, you're in breach of your contract because you're not playing the games on the dates in the time frame that was agreed upon. And the various sports governing bodies thrashed out deals with the TV companies saying we're aiming to resume at this point. We aim to finish our seasons by this point. And the NRL and the AFL managed to thrash out and solve the TV deal problem. Maintain their salary caps so the players don't have to take massive pay cuts. Bring sponsors into the sport, keep sponsors on board, and get fans back in stadiums. Tells you a lot about the response down under has been a lot better than the response in Europe, North and South America, and Asia and Africa. Australia and New Zealand are leading the way in the recovery of sport, and we could learn a lot of it. Do I think the Olympics takes place next year? With Japan pulling out the Eight Nations Rugby Union, there have been questions over the Olympics taking place next year. It's a big political thing in Japan as well. There's been a lot of political capital put into the Olympics in Tokyo. But bearing in mind the Olympics comes after the Euros and the World Championship Ice Hockey. So the first major sporting event that's going to be looked at is the Australian Open Tennis, the World Championship Ice Hockey, then the Euros, then the French Open and Wimbledon, and then the Olympics. So what you're seeing is there's several big international sporting events before the Olympics that we have to look at. The Australian Open looks likely it will go ahead because the US Open's gone ahead, and that's tennis. Then we get to the World Championship Ice Hockey. And that is an international sporting event, but it's only taking place in two venues in Switzerland. But there are nations from around, well, the Northern Hemisphere are participating. You've got European nations and the two North American nations participating. And that's where it gets interesting because of each individual nation's quarantine rules. They've got to go to Switzerland and they've got to quarantine. And then they've got to play the games. Now, I'm assuming there's going to be some kind of bubble, obviously, happening there where the players, the playing groups, the squads, the coaching staff and all that have to obviously isolate, etc. We're not sure if that's going to go ahead yet because domestic leagues, don't have any restart plans. French sport can't resume until next month at the earliest. We don't know what's happening with British ice hockey. You look at other events, there's no fans in attendance, and this is a sport that needs fans in attendance to make money. And then you have the French Open, Wimbledon, and the Euros, and then you have the Olympics. So there's some big sporting events to get through before we get to the Olympics. It will be interesting. Obviously, it's a 2-week event. That would require the athletes 6 weeks, basically. They would fly out, isolate, compete, fly back to home country. That's going to be an interesting one with things. Very interesting. Can the Japanese government and the organisers afford to cancel it? I don't know. But the fact that there's the question marks about will it go ahead, there are some other major sporting events coming before it that I think we need to consider, such as the Euros, such as the World Championship Ice Hockey. These are big sporting events that have also been pushed back a year. So we'll have to wait and see on the Olympics. I would say it's 50-50. I would say it's 50-50. But at the same time, well, again, it's a wait and see message on the part of the Olympics. I'm obviously I'm a sports fan like you guys. I'm looking from outside in. I would think that yes, you could isolate the athletes in the athletes' village quite successfully. Then you get to the backroom staff, the coaching staff, and all that. I think it's plausible that you could isolate the athletes and the support staff quite easily in the athletes' village for the duration of the Olympic Games, where the fans would be allowed, and that's a key one. That's where the Olympics makes a lot of money is fans in attendance. That will be very, very interesting. But it's a wait and see. But because there's an athletes' village there, it is plausible the Olympics can go ahead. However, there are issues with some of the qualifying events having to be postponed and cancelled. So not all the athletes have qualified for their events yet. So again, it's an interesting one. We shall see what happens. I think it's more likely to go ahead than the Euros. I think the Euros has a greater chance of being cancelled than the Olympic Games, because there is no athletes' village, because it's been played across a continent. I think the UEFA made a terrible blunder organising it that way from the get-go. Uh, and they even admitted, as soon as they worked out Euro 2020 as it was going to be played across the whole continent, we're never going to do this again. We need a host nation rather than everyone having every city having a crack. And now we've seen the flaws in the plan of having a transcontinental tournament. I think the Olympics is more likely to go ahead than the Euros. I think both events are still greater than 50-50 going ahead, but we don't know what's going to happen this winter yet, and we don't know what is going to happen in the next couple of months. There's a lot of unknowns, and with unknowns and lack of certainty, that creates a lot of problems in itself. So at this point in time, it's a wait and see, and that is really bizarre to say that, but because the Olympics don't have all the qualifying events completed and all the athletes have qualified, that's going to be interesting. There's still question marks about the World Cup in 2022 in Qatar being allowed to go ahead for a variety of reasons. So again, there is a lot of unknowns that we have to get through. There's a good 11 months until the Olympics, so a lot can happen in that time. We've seen a lot happen in 5 months, so I wouldn't want to put a marker down saying, yeah, this is definitely going to be cancelled, this is definitely going to take place. But there's been a lot of murmurings that it might be more prudent just to call it a day and not have the Olympics. The last time the Olympics didn't take place, it was scheduled to take place in Tokyo. World War II broke out. So Tokyo is a bit of a cursed city when it comes to Olympic Games. However, because there's the athletes' village there, I think you can isolate the athletes quite safely and keep them in a bubble. You can isolate the support staff because there is support accommodation there as well in the athletes' village. So, in that regard, I think on the competitor's point of view, you can get them in the country. You can isolate them for the 2 weeks. You can then have them, compete in their events. They're staying in the village. I think the best way to do it would be they fly in, isolate. Once their event's completed, they don't leave straight away. I think they should all leave, in nations on the flights back to their home countries. They isolate back in their home country for 2 weeks. Bang. I think you can look after the athletes quite well and quarantine them quite well, should this pandemic still be ongoing next year if it doesn't get under control. On the Euros and other international tournaments and big events, they're more likely to have problems. But it's a wait and see, it's a waiting game. It's whether the organisers feel it's safe to continue. But the fact that the Japanese have pulled out of the Eight Nations Rugby Union, worrying signs, plain and simple. But at the same time, there's a lot of unknowns going forward, and you just can't predict anything right now. Predicting anything would be stupid. I'm certainly not going to try and second guess the Olympic organisers. But the fact that they tried as long as possible to get the games going ahead last year, and this year, shall I say, they started. They basically postponed it until late. I think they left that decision quite late, considering the situation. It gives them an extra year to sort of coronavirus proof the venues, and I think yes, the athletes' village could work as a good, bubble for the athletes. You've still got athletes from all over the world, so it's a difficult one. But the Japanese have dealt quite well with the coronavirus in infection rate and quarantining and things like that. It will be interesting to see what occurs. T20 World Cup happening next year. Again, that's another international sporting event that has a lot of uncertainty, and the Lions Tour. Lots of uncertainties there. Again, we've got a good year or so before these events take place, but the Lions Tour, you've got another year. Are there concerns? I mean, in South Africa, sport hasn't resumed yet, so that is a concern in itself. But I wouldn't panic too much yet. I mean, there's a lot of questions, a lot of unknowns. They've got cricket restarted, so obviously you can isolate the playing squads, but it's a difficult one. They've sort of worked out a plan for some sports to resume. Other sports haven't been able to resume, and it depends on local governance allowing these events to take place. So we'll have to see what happens. I think the Olympics is a difficult one. The T20 World Cup, the Euros. Uh, we are so far out. There is time to prepare the venues. There is the virus may not. We might not have a second wave. We might have a second wave. We just don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if we're going to go into like another lockdown or anything. So there's a lot to consider when discussing these issues. So it's a wait and see policy. And it's the best way to think of it. And if events are cancelled or rearranged, they have more time now and a better understanding. I think the issue was this year, in the last 5 months, a lot of sports organisations really, it. They knew what was happening in China, yet they still ploughed on. Government still ploughed on business as usual until it was too late, and at which point then you have a problem. I think now that we understand that this isn't going anywhere anytime soon, you can mitigate some of the problems, but it's again a wait and see kind of solution. If that makes any sense, I don't. You know, we can see right. I mean, look, America. I mean, America is just, let's keep the politics out of it. I mean, I know the NBA has now made a stand, and you know, I think this is what the players should have done from the get go with Colin Kaepernick and taking the knee all those years ago, about 3-4 years ago. Was the players should have gone on strike. The players' union should have gone on strike. That would have really hurt the sports where it hurts the most, in the financial pocket, if games can't take place, if players are refusing to play. They didn't go on strike until now. It's taken too long. And then when Roger Goodell came out and said, "Oh yeah, we dealt with the whole knee situation incorrectly. We should have actually, supported the players rather than punished them." They're now on the back foot. It's a PR nightmare. I don't know. I'd rather keep politics out of it. I said yesterday that the best way to get diversity is from the bottom up, not from the top down, because forcing it upon something, you're going to get resistance. If you go out into the communities and you do your research and you enable opportunities for everyone at grassroots level, youth level, amateur level, you're going to get the change you seek, because everyone's piling in and they're going to demand it. You force it from the top down, from people who haven't had to face any kind of prejudice, normally from an organisation that's run by middle class, middle aged white people, predominantly men as well, it comes across as forced and it's a PR exercise. So, what we're seeing with the NBA, yes, the players I think should have gone on strike 4 years ago with Colin Kaepernick across a variety of sports, and the same over here in Europe with taking the knee before games and wearing like slogans and black armbands. The players should have gone on strike. They've been complaining on social media for years. They've been whining on social media for years, complaining about racist chanting from the stands, homophobic chanting from the stands, female sexist abuse, and all that. Go on strike. Hurt the sport the most financially. Then action will happen in your industry. They refuse. They did all these PR little gaslighting stunts that have done nothing apart from divide more. Had they taken a stance going through their players' unions 3, 4, 5 years ago, we wouldn't be at this stage now with sport and politics. I think we would have worked out as a better solution. Doing all these little PR stunts has done nothing to help the cause. It's divided more. The players' unions are there for a reason. The players have the opportunity to go through their player unions across sport, across the world, and gone, we're going on strike. And they chose not to. until the NBA has decided to start boycotting and refusing to play now. Plain and simple. When Colin Kaepernick took the knee, I think, yeah, that initial protest, fine. He's pissed off. He's making a point. The players then, the best way to support him is to refuse to play. Refuse to play for an organisation that tolerates racism, homophobia, sexism, etc., which was the NFL. It's highlighting issues in wider society that are clearly not being tackled. And it hurts the NFL and other sports in the pocket. What do sports care about? Money. And what have we seen how they badly spend things? Money. Great big GB gymnastics. Yeah, there's been a lot coming out about the GB gymnastics program, both men's and women's. Actually, it's not the only sport that's under the spotlight for the win at all costs mentality and athlete welfare. Yeah, there's UK sport and the various, UK cycling, athletics, swimming, gymnastics, ice hockey's in a mess. They've all had these reviews, and because we have the Olympic legacy and we obviously the medal table, we've been climbing up the medal table over years since the Atlanta Games, where we were absolutely the worst Olympics we've ever participated in. They decided to really look at why we, in 1996, we really had a shit Olympics, basically. And they brought in this high performance program, British UK sport, and the Olympic program. And gymnastics was one of those divisions of UK sport that had really struggled for a long time. Same with swimming, same with cycling. And look how many medals we've now won from 1996 till now in the Olympic sport. In the last couple of years, allegations have arisen of practices of win at all costs rather than the athlete welfare being taken into consideration, including with this winning at all costs mentality. And that is a fine dividing line. And, there is a fine dividing line between, putting your body on the line and then overdoing it. And a lot of cycling has come under the spotlight. Anyway, so the UK cycling was under review, and that came out quite badly about their attitudes to do with employment and all sorts, and that's been a mess. Gymnastics has been under the spotlight as well, and again, the same questions about athlete welfare have been coming up, and it is worrying. And gymnastics has been a sport that's regularly come up under the spotlight in recent years for coaches abusing their positions. Some of the younger athletes, being abused by their coaches. Athlete welfare. Gymnastics is a sport that's regularly come up with allegations of improper activity and issues to do with the sport and the governance. And that's been an ongoing concern for quite some time. But yeah, they are in hot water. It's a lot of negative press has come out about the UK sport program, the Olympic programs. Funding has been another one since 2012, and athlete welfare and bullying claims and abuse claims and a whole range of issues, administration, governance. A lot of issues have been raised since 2012. I think a lot of concerns have been raised on the side of the NBA destroying itself, of people switching off. America's a very divided country. We're not America at this point, although we are heading down a slippery slope. In fact, most of the Western world is heading down a slippery slope. But the fact that the players are starting to strike now, when they've had the opportunity for years, and they've been whining, and this is what I find interesting, is these players in all sports, And while racism and homophobia, sexism, and all that is wrong, shouldn't be tolerated, they've had ample opportunity over a long period of time to go on strike. But every time the players do have labour disputes, it's about money. And the PR optics are a disaster for both the league and the players' union. But they've had ample opportunity, ample, to go on strike and say, no, we're not happy with this situation. We're not happy with how things are going. And this gets raised a lot. If you're not happy with your works, your work conditions, go on strike. If you or me going out to work every day was unhappy with something that was happening in our workplace, so do you. So why not go on strike? I think the fact that there has been a shutdown and the NBA hierarchy has worked tirelessly to get the playoffs on, and now they're screwing with their timetable. Um, yeah, basketball fans aren't hockey fans. They're not going to switch to the NHL. Not all of them. I think there is issues in society, but these athletes have had ample opportunities to go through their players' union and say we're not happy with things. We're still receiving racist abuse. We're still no. I would go on strike. That's what trade unions are for. Striking, especially in a high-paid profession, has the knock-on effect you want. The NBA, though, I think these issues have been there from when Colin Kaepernick took the knee. All these athletes complaining on social media across the world about whatever, be it racism, homophobia, online abuse directed at them. That's why they have players' unions. The fact that, especially abuse within stadiums, is happening. The fact that they haven't taken up that opportunity to go, this is unacceptable, and support their fellow athletes as well. They haven't helped themselves until now. And yeah, it's divided America, but I can't stand America, to be honest. Supposed land of the free, if you're middle-aged, white, male, and wealthy. If you're working class, they don't give a toss. If you're of a colour, they don't give a toss. And if you're not wealthy, they don't give a toss. So America land the free if you have money. Yes, Sky Sports. I mean, I feel sorry for Le Tissier. The other two, I couldn't stand. Uh, yeah, it is a tick box exercise. Soccer Saturday, I haven't watched it since they took it off free to air TV. Plain and simple. It used to be on free to air TV and Sky Sports News, which used to be on Freeview until I think about 8 years ago. And then Sky took the decision, go, oh, it's getting popular. We'll just put that behind a paywall and milk it for money. Sky is one of those organisations that's a hypocritical organisation because the Murdoch empire fuels the right wing narrative and then does decisions like this. Matt Le Tissier is a footballing brain. I have no problem with Matt Le Tissier being a pundit. He's a very intelligent footballer. But at the same time, same as happening with TalkSport, owned by the same people, owned by News Corp. They are doing the tick box exercise, which doesn't solve the problem of diversity. It actually creates more division. I discussed this the other day. The best way to increase diversity is from the grassroots level, and then you get a wider pool of people competing on an equal footing for these jobs in the media, for these jobs in management, rather than just going, all right, she's female, she's getting a job here. And Laura Woods on TalkSport is painful because it is a tick box exercise, and that does nothing. It actually causes more problems. Sky, they're playing the PR game. They're playing the PR game. All these mainstream media outlets are losing viewers anyway to, social media. They're playing the PR game. And Sky and BT came out of the PR game over the lockdown quite badly when it came to football demanding their money back, especially when the lower league clubs were going, we're going to go bust. Cheers for screwing us over. We're going to go bust. BBC are doing the same. It's just tick box. It's like when I applied for jobs, back in the day, your gender. My name is a male name. Why would I have to tick the box? Am I male? My sexuality, what's that got to do with anything? The color of my religion. So I'm applying to work in waste disposal. This is going back here. I'm going to use this as an example. So you get your job application, right? Name, date of birth, fine. Put my name, date of birth, national insurance. That's not a problem. Those are things you need, right? For tax and all that. Gender. I'm dealing with people's shit. What does my gender have to do with me to read, right? Um, religion. What does my religious beliefs have to deal with recycling? Rubbish. Sexual orientation. Really? Color of one's skin. These are on forms. And I'm thinking to myself, how has any of that got to do with the ability of me physically doing my job? And I had the same when I got my last job. I had to go through all these forms for HR. These tick box exercises create more division and more frustration than unity. It's a mental, politically correct thing. And the only thing that should be on a form, can you speak English as a first language? Or if I'm living abroad, can I speak this language as a first language? Can I understand what I've been told? The answer is yes or no. If I need a translator abroad, I shouldn't be working abroad. Plain and simple. Right? So all this crap is not necessary in an application form. I don't plug my TV into any aerial, so I don't need a TV license. Well, I sort of do, but I don't pay for one. What's the point? It's all propaganda anyway. The Soccer Saturday. I'm not a Sky Sports fan. Never have been. I don't believe that sport should be behind a paywall. It should be joint rights for everything. I've made that be very clear. I'm not a fan of Sky or the Murdoch Media. I'm not a fan of BT Sport. I think that's actually a joke. But I did notice something on the Europa League and Champions League final. Jake Humphrey has been removed as presenter, and on YouTube they've turned off the live chat replay because there was a lot of negativity towards Jake Humphrey and the presenters in 2018. So in 2019, 2020, they removed the chat replay. So you couldn't, put things on the live chat on the YouTube streams on BT Sport for both the European Cup finals, which I found really interesting. 2018 and 2017, when I watched the European finals on YouTube and all that, there was a live chat where you could put your comments. The irony. On the side of the soccer, like Le Tissier, Tomo, and what's his name, the Scottish guy. Sky, they sacked them for what? They've done nothing wrong. Okay, Tomo with his big nose is a pain in the arse. They've done nothing wrong. They've done their jobs. They've got the sack. And what Sky are saying is it's cost cutting. So not only are they replacing them with, the PC brigade stuff, those guys who replace them are getting paid less. So the diversity thing is a hypocrisy argument anyway. If the Sky are saying we're cost cutting, so we're letting these three guys go, that's the official statement, and they're replacing them with a diverse panel. Firstly, Mika Rich is Jermaine genius. They could easily do it. Piece of piss. Be just as capable, if not better. And what Sky are saying is it's cost cutting. So whoever's coming to replace them is going to get paid less money. And if you're going to lose your target audience, you're going to, your ratings are going to slump. And yeah, there's plenty of middle-aged, mixed race and black men as well who watch Soccer Saturday and have a laugh at the program as well. I think Sky doing the PR exercise, they're doing a knee-jerk reaction, and they're pandering to an organisation that has links to militant Marxism. Which is insidious, which is just as bad as those who are being actively racist. I can't see Matt Le Tissier doing anything wrong. Tomo, the Scottish bloke who I can't stand, they've done nothing wrong. They've done their jobs. They've done what they've been paid to do by their employer, yet they lose their jobs for what? Their age, the colour of their skin. And that's also discrimination then. If they can then find they've been replaced because of the colour of their skin or their age, that's also discrimination. And then Sky has a lawsuit on their hands. And this is the problem. We've got seeing a lot of knee-jerk reactions. and we're just putting people in positions because of their gender or the colour of their skin, not because of their capability. Um, you know, it's just ridiculous. It is ridiculous. If you want to improve diversity, you have to improve things at the grassroots, and you have to ask the question: why are so many ex-players of all colours not going into management? Right? You see all these ex-players doing punditry for the media because it's a safe gig. Even Jamie Carragher managed to keep his job after spitting at a child, so it's a pretty safe gig. You can be Paul Merson and a pisshead and keep your job because they haven't sacked Paul Merson. He's a drunk and a drug user. He's still in a job. Right? This is Sky for you. Right? You have to ask the question why all these ex-players are going into punditry, right, rather than into management and coaching. Job security. Job security. They can actually earn some decent money in the media for a lot longer than management. It's less stressful as long as you're not a controversial or a bit of a div. I mean, there's been a couple of divs in the media who rightly got sacked for some of the things they've done. Matt Letizia has done nothing wrong. Absolutely nothing wrong. He would be a brilliant coach as well. He would be a brilliant coach because of his knowledge. But he's done nothing. They've done nothing wrong. They have been let go because of their gender, their colour of their skin, and their age. That's it. Sky saying it's cost cutting. Really, it's no, they're not. They're not quite the right PR that we need right now. They don't quite fit what we want right now. They've done nothing wrong. Alan Brazil going down to 2 days a week on Talksport. He's 61, right? Jamie Carragher should be sacked. His voice is like nails down a blackboard. Jamie Carragher should be sacked because he spat at a child and is a fuck. Gary Neville should be sacked because he's an asshole. Although during the pandemic he was looking after the NHS nurses at his hotel chain, so I'll give him that, but he's still an absolute dickhead. Sky likes hiring assholes. Paul Merson, yes, addiction is a terrible thing, but he regularly relapses with the alcohol and the drugs. He has not been reprimanded for it. He still has a job. So, yeah, messages. Right. I'm getting some stuff dropped off my flat later on. Yeah, I think sport and politics should be separated. Unfortunately, what's happened is it's just become a bit of a mess. So you can't enjoy just getting away from the political and social problems and enjoying sport for what it is. There's got to be some kind of political agenda behind it. But then you can ask questions about women's sport. Hope Solo, right? She's got convictions for child battery and child abuse. Still employed as a sports pundit. What? If a bloke did that, definitely never getting a job in the media. Hope Silo, female, has got convictions for child assault and a few other issues. Right? She's, it is what it is. I think Sky, the BBC, ITV is just for dumb people. The touring car coverage is quite good, and the coverage of the Tour de France, the Vuelta, and the Giro is quite good. But ITV is dumbed down TV. To be honest, Channel 4 is going bust and is left wing shite. Channel 5 is just plugging along as that other channel on the old free to air stuff. And that's the terrestrial free to air networks. They're up against it. The pay subscription networks are up against it. People are switching off. They're switching off. We saw it during the lockdown. BT and Sky were losing subscribers hand over fist. And people weren't happy that they were being charged these subscription fees for Jack Grealish. Grealish has some off-field antics, and I think Southgate's very good when he notices players, have personality traits. So Maguire being dropped is a punishment for his misbehaviour in Greece. Grealish, I think, being left out. I think again he did some lockdown antics. He didn't behave himself during the lockdown phase. So I think that's a bit of punishment on the side of Southgate saying these players, you've got to, buck your ideas up. We've got to have a better image for what we're trying to, represent. But Southgate, I don't know. I'm not sold on Southgate getting balance of the squad right. When Vardy basically said, and Ben Foster said, we don't feel valued because we're older players. Vardy was the top goal scorer this season in the Premier League. Southgate has not reached out and go, do you want to, come back to international football and, reconsider your retirement? Vardy would be really useful in the counter-attacking side up front. He's got pace that Kane doesn't have, and he likes that counter-attacking style of football. That's why Leicester won the Premier League and why he's actually been quite good and effective in the Rodgers system. Okay, Ben Foster got relegated with Watford, but he's still a pretty decent goalkeeper. I'm not sold on Jordan Pickford, and yeah, I'm not so sure Southgate's dealing with more senior players. He's got too much youth there and not enough experience. I think that holds the team back. You need one or two players over the age of 30 in the squad to guide these young kids around. And Vardy and who else? Who else was it? And Cahill basically said, "Look, we'll be open to returning, but unfortunately, the coach wants to go down this direction." And I think that's what's going to do England is the team is too young, and the team is too young. You need one or two experienced old heads in there just to guide these players around, and a lot of them haven't performed well even before the lockdown. I will agree on that. Not that I've really been following football as much as I used to. The Grealish thing, I think the reason why he's left him out is because of behavioural issues, and that's because Grealish keeps getting up to no good off the field. And during the lockdown, Grealish did misbehave. Maguire misbehaved. Both have been dropped. If you notice, both Grealish and Maguire in the last 5 months have got up to no good off the field. Maguire in Greece and Grealish at that house party in Solihull where he crashed his car, pissed. That's not the first time Grealish had an off-field incident. I think that's Southgate giving a message to these guys: you've got to behave. Kyle Walker should not be personally anywhere near a Premier League defence. To be honest, his behaviour during lockdown was pretty disgusting. Then again, if you're going to cheat on your missus and disrespect your family and put it on social media, you're a dickhead. I have no respect for Kyle Walker. He's a knob, and he's a known knob, and he treats women like shit. He's a playboy, and he doesn't care. His attitude's disgraceful. When you look at his performances, they're shocking. He's not a good player. Dyer confronting the fan after the abuse he was receiving, and that could have been a very nasty moment. Again, he hasn't played well. Ward-Prowse is decent for Southampton. I'll give him that. Ward-Prowse is a decent player. Tyrone Mings is a decent player. And clearly Southgate sees something in them. But Southgate, the issue with Southgate's squad is it's too inexperienced. If you've got players in there who haven't even played Premier League football, I'm worried about the quality level and experience of the squad. You need the fact that he hasn't reached out to Cahill and he hasn't reached out to Vardy and discussed with them, your experienced heads. Vardy's the top goal scorer in the Premier League this season, Golden Boot winner. I think the reason why, when he said he's basically announcing his international retirement, he felt that alongside Cahill that, we're over the age of 30, Southgate's not going to want to pick us, we're going to... And I think there is issues there with Southgate going with too many young players. And having Kyle Walker as one of the senior players in the squad is, no, he's not the guy to teach these kids how to be good professionals. Look at his antics off the field during lockdown, disgraceful. Mason Greenwood is a better striker than Kane. Southgate's going to do anything rubbish Kane as a striker. Yes, that pass that he could have made to Sterling, but Sterling at that point was missing everything. He couldn't hit a barn door. Sterling has improved his quality of finishing. I will admit that. He still misses a lot of shots he should get, though. I mean, Sterling, the one flaw in his game is his final product. Great pace, great link-up play. His finishing in front of goal is improving, but that has always been a flaw in his game. But you can't criticise him for that. Apparently, you're racist. But you can say Rashford should play, and apparently, I don't know. Harry Kane, not. I think he is overrated because he takes a lot of penalties and free kicks. Open play, slow and lumbering. He's a great hold-up merchant, but he doesn't have the pace to trouble defences. I think I think Southgate has got his favourites, but we'll see what happens. I'm not going to try and debate what a coach sees in training and what a coach sees on match reviews and looking at the tape and obviously when you select players you've got scouts as well, what they see. Scouts will go to training sessions and scouts will go to matches and all that. But I think Southgate is making a few errors with his squad, and I think the lack of senior players such as Abadi who could guide some of these young players around is concerning. And the fact you haven't got someone like Gary Cahill, I wouldn't trust Kyle Walker to be the senior player in that squad. He'll probably take one down a brothel or something. And they'll probably end up with syphilis. That'll be the only thing they'll catch. They won't catch a flight abroad. They'll catch syphilis. Jokes aside, I do think there are concerns about Calvin Phillips. Will he though? Because the pace of the Premier League is faster than the pace of the Championship and League One and League Two. I think the lack of leadership in the squad is the problem. Any international squad, if you look at World Cup squads that are successful, there'll always be one or two or possibly three players over the age of 30. He doesn't have that. He's lost that experience with his policy of this youth policy. You still need players who have that guile, experience and knowledge. And losing Cahill and Vardy and Ben Foster out of any squad, even if they don't play every game, you lose the nitty gritty side of it, which you need to win. That's what I sent him text. Bloody phone. But but any successful team always has at least a handful of players in a squad over the age of 30. That experience, that leadership is necessary. But I think Henderson is a better captain and a better man motivator and a better energy player than Kane. But again, Southgate in his early games in charge was flip flopping captain until he decided to settle on Kane after going through several captains. He couldn't decide on who was going to be the leadership group because there's so many young players, and that's the problem. I think the team is too young. It's nice having these young players coming through. They're not getting the game time in the Premier League, a lot of them. International level is a complete different kettle of fish to league games. And there's a lack of senior experience in the squad. And now that Maguire and Grealish have been dropped for their personal indiscretions, that's my personal opinion. Yet Kyle Walker's allowed in there, even though he's not played well for a couple of seasons, and his off-field antics are less than becoming. He could have got up to all those naughty things and not posted them over social media. Kyle Walker is not the best guy to be the senior player or one of the senior players in the squad. He should not be anywhere near this squad. His playing performances aren't good enough to start off, and his off-field antics bring the game into disrepute. One game in a season is not great, and I look at Kyle Walker, and since he's joined Man City, he's definitely declined as a player. His off-field antics are a problem and a concern. And I think if you want to have a successful, happy, positive squad, he's not one of the guys you want in it. But it's neither here nor there, really. I mean, if England, win games and do well, then obviously Southgate's proved right. But as we saw in the World Cup, they did struggle to score goals from open play. And they were far too reliant on set plays. They were far too reliant on penalties. And they still have that issue of playing for a full 90 minutes. So, and there's clearly an imbalance between left and right in the side. But, at the end of the day, I mean, that is an issue that's dogged England for a long time, is the lack of a left-sided player, or a lack of left-sided players, plural. Um, and when I say left-sided, it's players who play their position down the left. It doesn't mean left-footed, it's left-sided. There's been an issue for a good 20, 30 years of the left-hand side of England's midfield, or left wing backs, or left wingers being lacking and having a lack of depth in that position. That's been an ongoing problem since Southgate was in the England setup as a player in the 90s. It's been an issue. The left-hand side has been a problem for a very, very long time, and it hasn't been solved. Where you have players who are comfortable in that position, who may be two-footed, they could be right-footed, could be left-footed, doesn't matter, but their position is always on the left. There has been an issue, depth on the left-hand side of England's midfield, defence, and on the wing. That's been an issue for 20, 30 years. Hotly debated in the 90s and the 2000s was the weakness down the left. It's carrying on till now. The fact that only 10 to 15% of people are left-footed anyway, naturally. But not to have players playing in on the left who are comfortable in that position is a concern. And I think that's another weakness for England, is the lack of left-sided players. But again, that's another problem, another hurdle we'll get to. Yeah, I think the fact I've actually gone off football a lot over the last couple of years, you know, the sport. I'm not as excited about this coming Euros as I thought I would be. I'm not as excited about this England squad as I have been when I was younger. I've lost a lot of interest and a lot of joy in the sport, and the last 5 months has really highlighted why I don't like the sport. Harry Kane is he had Harry Kane divides opinion. His lack of pace is the concern, and the fact that there's not enough experienced players in that squad. You've lost the Jamie Vardys, you've lost your Cahills, is a problem. Big problem. I think the squad balance is too young, it's imbalanced, and there are players who clearly should be playing on playing ability who are not in the squad, and there are players in the squad because Southgate's likes them. But we'll see what happens. I'm not getting ahead of myself. It would be nice to see England do well at another tournament, possibly win a tournament. It's long overdue. A lot of these young players have done well at youth level, but they're not playing enough for their club sides. And that's an ongoing issue as well that Southgate has mentioned, is there is an issue with players getting first team experience, but it's what it is. Anyway, I'm going to call the stream there. It's been really interesting. I'll have some more videos for you tomorrow evening, and I might post some more videos later tonight, but I'll call that a day. Some really interesting questions, interesting discussions, and I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.